And I know a lot of people had mentioned before that they really loved the stories of kind of, the old African ball python
It's my
stories.
favorite.
And, it was definitely the Wild Wild West, backing all the way up to where, back in the original Orlando reptile shows, probably the second reptile show in Orlando. It went from a place called Howard Johnson's to the Twin Towers. It was at the Twin Towers for about 10 or 11 years before it ultimately moved to Daytona. But I think it was the second year I met Emmanuel Noah. A lot of people just know him as Noah from Africa, and he was from Ghana, Accra, Ghana. And he was actually the minister of forestry there, but as you can imagine, in many African countries, the government is pretty corrupt, and he was definitely a pretty corrupt individual. He's still kind of a friendish of mine. I mean, we had good times and bad times, and we did great deals together, and he screwed me a lot. It's like, but he actually, he did have family. As a matter of fact, I think that his wife at one point ran for a senator spot in Florida. She was an attorney, and I think she lived in Florida. I think she still lives in Florida. So he had a place in Florida and had a place in Accra, Ghana. And so he came to that show with a number of ball pythons, like a bag of ball pythons. And I to this day, I remember going up to his room and him dumping out a bag of ball pythons. And I think I bought, maybe there was like 20 babies. And I think I bought one or two that were really cool. But I wish I could take a screenshot of those 20 ball pythons. Because I know there was some heat in there. I know there was some heat in there. But this was so early in the game, we didn't know there was no.
You didn't know what heat was because that's determined by a market, right?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know anything about. There was no pastels, there was no spiders, there was no pinstripes, there was no clowns, there was none of that stuff at that point. And so, I'm sure, I remember I bought one that he called a Goblin ball python. Turned out that it wasn't genetic and never was able to prove it out. But I mean, I could have probably bought all 20 of those ball pythons for, maybe $1,500, and I think I bought like 2 of them for like $100 a piece or something like that. And I don't know that I don't think either one of them ever proved it. I think one was like a striped animal. And early on, the striped ball pythons were kind of like the rage. You really had like striped, and you had what they call type A jungle ball pythons, which a guy named Jamie Quick basically was the one that termed them that. And neither one of those, striped or now genetic stripe proved out with Bob Clark, but
that specific stripe didn't prove out.
But the actual like dorsal striping, to this day, there is no real. I mean, like cypress does do some dorsal striping, but it's not considered a stripe; it's considered a cypress, and certainly some other mutations have some striping in it and stuff like that. But there's still have yet to been like just kind of a
solid
a
one stripe.
Striped ball python. Again, tri-stripes, genetic stripes, cypress, stuff like that. But nevertheless, point is that all that early on stuff ended up turning out to just be nothing. But cool looking ball pythons. So we didn't really even know what we were looking for. But that was kind of my first, entrance into Africa was meeting Emmanuel Noah in Orlando, coming friends with him. And then ultimately we decided after a couple years of buying stuff from him, and there was actually a guy named Joe Fosse, who I told the story before, ironically enough, just went to school with at like the University of Florida or Florida State or something like that. And they were roommates in a dorm. Emmanuel Noah came to here to do his university, and him and Joe were both, like Noah didn't mind reptiles, but I don't think he was a reptile guy. He just came from Africa, Accra, Ghana, and Joe was like a big reptile guy. So I think they kind of, and there was like, hey, wait a second, you're from Africa, let's import ball pythons. And next thing you know, that's what happened. And I told the story before that if it wasn't for that relationship, Joe Fosse was the one that talked Noah into collecting wild caught gravid females and hatching eggs. Rather than sending over. Prior to that, you just got wild-caught ball pythons were sent over, and they were terrible. I mean, 99% of them didn't survive. They wouldn't eat. They were terrible animals. And if it wasn't for that relationship with Joe Fosse and Emmanuel Noah, we wouldn't have the ball python trade that we have now today. And so it started off with Noah just producing maybe a couple hundred babies a year. And then ultimately, fast forward maybe 10, 12 years when the ball python world really started to pop, there was over 120,000 baby ball pythons being hatched over in Africa in facilities that were actually collecting gravid females, hatching the babies and so on like that. So anyways, point is that when things started popping and I started buying stuff from Joe Fosse because I met Noah, and then Noah, of course, told me that he was exporting all his stuff to Joe Fosse. And so I used to go down to the Tampa area where Joe was and every year and go visit his facility when he got in his 200 or 300 ball pythons, and I would choose through stuff. And I often say that's where I got my first clown ball python was from Joe Fosse. It was a big female that was... ironically enough, I bred her to an albino first, and I produced double head albino clowns before I even had clowns.
Isn't that
crazy?
Else.
And then, of course, Tracy Barker and Dave from VPI produced out clowns, and then we produced albino clowns the same year we produced clowns. Which was interesting.
Just the way it lined up, right?
Yeah,
with the recessives and stuff. Yeah,
just because that was all I had to breed them to, But then I started to mingle in Africa itself, starting to make connections in West Africa outside of Noah, because Noah, of course, was kind of the strong arm in Accra. Of course, there was a couple other guys. There was a guy named Jimmy Akwanda and, a few other guys that were pretty major dealers and had been dealing in ball pythons for many, many years in Accra, Ghana. But then you had, it was pretty easy once you started making these connections to find out who all the players were, right? And so in Lomé, Togo, there was Eric Fouchard, who was the main guy over in Lomé, and still is to this day. And really, these players are still the same players today as they were back then. It hasn't changed that much. So we got, you got to know Eric Fouchard, and I got his contact information and started talking to him. And hey, if you have something cool, let me know. Blah 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 blah. And then ultimately, Patrice was the big player in Benin, which Benin had the largest quota, and so a lot of animals were coming out of Benin that were really, really cool. A lot of the mutations and stuff like that. But then sometimes stuff would come out of Accra, not because Accra was doing. As a matter of fact, I think they had the lowest quota, but animals were traveling from Benin to Togo back to Ghana because the money was kind of in Ghana at the time. And so it was pretty interesting to, slowly put those names together. Like, all right, now I've got the three big guys, really, Jimmy Akwanda, four guys, I guess, Jimmy Akwanda, Emmanuel, Noah, Eric Fouchard, and Patrice. And then you started to find like their people.
Yeah, their little crew, right?
Like their guys, like, guys like BM Banu, and there was a guy named Edward, and just the list goes on. And so I started getting in touch with all these guys, and they were all kind of looking out for me, and we created this little network of people in all three of the countries that were exporting ball pythons. And I wouldn't say I got every call, but I got most of the calls, right? When something cool popped up, I'd say probably 90% of the time I would get the phone call like, hey, I got this really cool ball python. Again, before the internet, so you couldn't get pictures or anything like that. So I would have to send over, and I would have to, figure out who was going to actually ship. So if it was in Lomé, I would get Eric Fouchard to ship. If it was in Benin, we'd get Patrice to ship. And of course, if it was in Ghana, I would get either Jimmy Akwanda or Emmanuel Noah to ship, and it really over several years worked out to be a pretty crazy thing, you know what I mean? And it just kept growing and growing. And I tell you what, Jay, you'll laugh about this.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of money, I was still growing my business and stuff like that. And every year I would take a mortgage on my house to go into the ball python season.
Hell yeah,
every
dude.
single
That's
year,
commitment, bro.
I would take huge. Maybe it was like $80,000 I would be able to take out of my house, and then the idea was let's pay that $80,000 back so that next year I could take it out again, and so we would buy and we would keep some stuff, and then we would sell enough stuff to hopefully pay our money back. You know what I mean? Like get that loan back. I still can't believe that Lori let me do that shit
multiple times. I mean?
Like
that's fucking
years,
crazy, dude.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge step, right? Especially I'm sure at this point, were you crushing it with colubrids at this point, or was it still kind of like an early day?
Colubrids were, we were producing quite a bit of colubrids, but colubrids were really cheap. There wasn't a lot of money in colubrids.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So to be like, hey, trust me, I know there's not a lot of money in these, but there might be money in these. That's
that's
huge.
the always thing that people don't understand is that Lori has really allowed me to do things that probably 99.9% of wives would never allow because it just, it's.
But that's also why you have the life you have is because you took those risks and stuff. You know?
I think that we've always kind of portrayed Lori, I think, on the vlog and as
the naysayer,
the naysayer, right? And she is. I mean, she really does. Like, she's the yin to my yin.
Because we are crazy.
Yeah, because
we'll be like, oh, dude, let's get an elephant tomorrow. Yeah.
And so she kind of keeps me in check, but she always. Seems to support decisions that are, I mean, some of the things we've done over the years have been wild, what I mean? Like really radical. And she's always supported me through it, and she doesn't really, I mean, I was surprised today, right? That she came downstairs. We're working on the basement and I kind of threw it out there. I had never really talked to her. I said, hey, we're going to have a popcorn machine here.
Pac-Man
There's going to be
machine.
There's a Pac-Man machine. We're going to have, a refrigerator over
really,
here.
She was just like, nobody better be down here fucking off.
All she said was, I just hope that the crew doesn't come down here during my time and do nothing, and you better keep it clean.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the end of
it.
And
that's fair.
And I thought to myself, wow, I thought as soon as I started talking about Pac-Man
she's like, Brian, you ain't getting a fucking Pac-Man.
You get no Pac-Man machine down here. What the hell are you thinking? But for me, I think it's like one of those things that, at the end of a long day, normally maybe I'd go home. Maybe this will give us an opportunity to chill a little bit.
Yeah, have a place to like hang out that doesn't feel like you're at work necessarily.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure there will be. I mean, Jay and I both said this. There'll be days I'll probably spend the night here. I mean, I'm probably gonna. There. As a matter of fact, tonight, I hope I have enough time because I'm doing another podcast tonight with my buddy Jason at
Mixed Morphology.
Mixed Morphology.
I
always say that, Mixed Morphology. What is it?
It's morph mixology.
Morph mixology. Thank you. I'll mess that up all night long.
Damn, son.
Can we rail this in?